So we now have a last presentation for today, and it is by Christophe Mason-Parker and Dr. Ryan Daly. So Christophe Mason-Parker is originally from the UK and has lived in Seychelles for the past 11 years, where he is currently the CEO of the Marine Conservation Society Seychelles. And Dr. Ryan Daly was the research director of the Save Our Seas Arros Research Centre. He is now a scientist at the Oceanographic Research Institute in Durban, South Africa, where his primary interests are investigating the spatial ecology of top marine predators. So I now pass on to Christophe and Dr. Daly for their presentation.
Okay, thank you, Ashley. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Yeah, so I'm going to give you a brief presentation on a new field guide titled Reef Fishes of Seychelles, which is due for publication early next year. So just as way of an introduction, as most of you know, the Republic of Seychelles is made up of 115 islands, which are located in the Western Indian Ocean. And the exclusive economic zone covers an area of almost 1.4 million kilometers squared. And within this, there's about 1,700 kilometers squared of coral reefs. The Seychelles is part of the Madagascar and Indian Ocean hotspot, and it has high levels of endemism and species of international significance, and that includes several fish species. So to provide a bit of background, it was in 1954 that the Smiths visited Seychelles on their expeditions to record marine fish. And at the time, they recorded 775 species of marine fish in Seychelles waters. And this resulted in the publication of Fishes of Seychelles in 1969, which was the first comprehensive guide to the reef fish found in Seychelles waters. Further studies have been conducted since then by Polunin, Randall and Egmond, and this has increased the numbers of fish species further. And today there's over 900 different species of coral reef and associated habitat fish found in Seychelles waters, and this number is increasing all the time. So this map of the Seychelles EZ just shows some of the areas where we recorded fish species over the last few years for the guide. Unfortunately, obviously, the Seychelles area is huge, so we weren't able to visit all of the islands, but we did include each of the island groups. So with regards to fish distribution, the guide focuses only on those species that are found within the limits of recreational scuba diving, so to a depth of around 40 meters or so. And then it's important to note that the marine species, and this sort of goes back to the presentation that Noam gave earlier on connectivity, but the marine species of the Aldabra group, including Cosmolido and Astove, are much more similar to those of northern Madagascar than they are to the granitic Seychelles Islands in the east. And distribution is determined by the fish's ability to disperse and colonize new areas, as well as those prevailing currents that sweep across the Western Indian Ocean, and the different species' habitat preference, where they decide to settle. If we take the fish in the top left-hand corner, the Centropyge debilius, the angelfish, so this particular species is confined to the Aldabra group within Seychelles. It has a very limited distribution, and it's also found in Mauritius and Reunion. Whereas other species like the butterfly fish in the top right-hand corner, Chytometratus, that's found throughout the Indian Ocean. However, it's absent from the granitic islands because it prefers depths of below around 20 meters on coral walls, and where it usually hides within caves and crevices. Then we have other species like the bourgeois in the bottom right-hand corner, the Lujana sebe, which a lot of people in Seychelles will be familiar with. It's commercially very important here, and it's only really found on the Seychelles plateau. It much prefers granitic submerged reefs. Again, it's more of a deeper reef species of 20 meters and below, and it's not really found within the rest of the EEZ. And then you have species that are found throughout the Western Indian Ocean and in the Pacific as well, such as the scorpionfish, Rhinopius eschimeri, but it's an extremely uncommon species throughout its range. So one of the things we wanted to record within the guide was the number of species that are listed on the IUCN Red List. And Seychelles is home to a number of threatened species. There are also many species that are unfortunately data deficient, so could likely be threatened as well. We just simply don't have the information for them at this time. But the number of the species in the top 3 categories, critically endangered, endangered, and vulnerable, is increasing, unfortunately. And most of the species are exhibiting a decreasing trend. And in part, or largely, that's because many of these species are targeted by fisheries. So I've just included a few examples here. We have the scalloped hammerhead on the top left there, which was recently added to the, upgraded rather, on the list to critically endangered. And this is one of the most commonly caught sharks in Seychelles waters. And then below it, we've got the white-spotted wedfish, which is again targeted in fisheries in Seychelles. Is also caught as bycatch and some of the mackerel beach seine fisheries, and again is listed as critically endangered. There's a couple of endangered species here found in Seychelles as well, like the ornate eagle ray, which is very uncommon throughout its range, which is both the Indian Ocean and the Pacific. But again, that turns up quite frequently at Victoria Market, so it is caught here in Seychelles. And then the Napoleon wrasse at the bottom there is also listed as endangered. And this species is quite common around some of the outer islands in Seychelles, and Dr. Daly will be giving a presentation about this species tomorrow. But it's very popular within the live reef fish food trade in Southeast Asia, and it's susceptible to population crashes. So it's becoming quite scarce across its range outside of Seychelles and in Asia. And then there's a few species in Seychelles waters that are also listed as vulnerable. The bumphead parrotfish, Bolbometapon miracatum, would have been found in large schools of 30 to 50 individuals around the granitic islands once upon a time. But now it's rare to see more than 4 or 5 fish together at any one time. They sleep out in the open at night, and they're easily targeted by fishermen. And the camouflage or snub-lodged grouper, again, an important food fish in Seychelles that is becoming increasingly rare within the inner island group. And most of the time now, when you see this particular species turn up the market, you know that it's been caught in the outer islands. So to give you a bit more information about the field guide itself, it's going to be available in the first quarter to second quarter of next year. Hopefully, it's going to be the most comprehensive guide to date on the reef and associated habitats fish species of Seychelles. So it's going to include over 550 different species. We've also taken 700 different photographs, which are all taken in situ within Seychelles waters. And where possible, we've tried to include different color variations, as well as sexual dimorphism and juvenile and adult life stages, to enable the reader to differentiate between different and the same species. It includes the names in English and also Creole where possible, as well as the scientific names. And just to say as well that the book is going to be published by John Beaufoy Publishing, and it will be available in Seychelles as well as overseas. So I'm just going to hand you over now to Dr. Daly, who's going to tell you a little bit more about some of the findings that we came about in the making.
Yeah, thank you guys all so much for having me. Thank you, Chris, for that great introduction. Thank you, Ashley, for hosting us today. So yeah, why are we interested in this? I think just sort of a little bit of a background from my side. Seychelles is home to an incredible fish biodiversity, and one of the places for me that sort of started an interest in the fish biodiversity in Seychelles was the island of Arros Island and St. Joseph Atoll in the Almirante. And in 2018, we conducted a rapid biodiversity assessment of all of the species there. And largely this was done because we knew that in many other Seychelles islands and other islands in the Western Indian Ocean, there were many more fish species known to occur. And there were some notable expeditions in the 90s out to the Almirante that noted the presence of unique fish species not found anywhere else. And so in 2018, we conducted a really focused assessment of the fish species around these two small islands, and predicted we would find many species because of the diverse habitat types, typically a outer island reef crest and drop off, as well as a deep channel, seagrass beds, sand flats, and an atoll lagoon environment, which is typical of many of the outer islands in Seychelles. So it only took us about 3 weeks to literally look under every rock and in every seagrass bed and record and photograph the number of fish species in all of these areas. And as you can see just on the curve on the screen there, with the number of days surveyed and the cumulative number of fish species, we got to about 514 fish species in only 3 weeks, which is incredible, and increased the number of known species from these islands from about 250 up to 500. So doubling the number of known species in just 3 weeks. And it was just an indication that there are many more fish species than we had ever thought right on our doorstep out there. And just looking at how that compares to previous sort of fish records in Seychelles, from the Aldabra group, there's about 330 species known. I'm sure there's many more. And other Seychelles inner islands, about 400 species. But in the larger region, we know Chagos, for example, has at least 780 species. And so we knew that we were going to come into contact with many more fish species in the region. And if we looked at the broader Western Indian Ocean, this is just showing the number of species per island. Just from Arros and St. Joseph Island, which are tiny islands within the broader Seychelles group, we're getting over 500 species, which is comparable with many of the other islands in the Western Indian Ocean, and in fact, many more species than in other areas on the mainland too. And this is literally just two tiny islands in the broader Seychelles, just highlighting the unique fish biodiversity of Seychelles waters. So when we did this rapid biodiversity assessment, we found at least 16 fish species that had not been recorded in Seychelles waters before. And I just want to quickly go through some of those species just to show you what they look like. 6 of these species, at least, as you can see on the screen here, were thought to occur in Seychelles waters. We expected them to be there based on records from islands around Seychelles. And I think the reason that many of them had not been found is just because they were small, cryptic, they lived in a lagoon, they were deeper, or had just been overlooked because they were similar looking to other species. But with a little bit of attention, we were able to easily identify these and confirm their distribution in Seychelles. And since 2018, there's been a number of additional species we've confirmed to occur in Seychelles waters. And I think the more we look, the more we're going to find. Then some of the species we found represented some really significant range extensions. And just briefly, some of these species, notably these 2 species, both wrasse families, were only known to occur in the Andaman Islands and the Eastern Indian Ocean previously. But we confirmed by working together with collaborators throughout the region that these species did indeed occur in Seychelles, and just highlighted that Seychelles is either connected to the Eastern Indian Ocean more than we think, or that these fish do disperse across the Indian Ocean in Seychelles, and it's worth looking for more of these species. Other species were really rare. This species had never been photographed in the wild before and was only known from the aquarium trade in Kenya. So just really amazing to see it in the wild. in Seychelles. And it's probably a lot more widespread than previously known. And then these 3 species were known to occur in Chagos, and were just examples of species that a well-known taxonomist had focused on previously. They're all pygmy gobies or aviota species that occur in sort of deeper caves, so you really have to know what you're looking for. And as soon as we sort of identified 1 or 2 of those, we just found a whole lot of species that occur in Seychelles. So just really unique records and these range extensions of fish species in the region. We also discovered a new species. This is an example of one. They're really tiny little fish, but I think really beautiful. And again, the genus is Aviota, and there are probably many more of these species, but to describe a species is not very easily. You first have to photograph it, and then you need to get a sample from it. The ministry helped us to get a transfer agreement so we could send it off to get described by taxonomists based out in California, and confirmed and described this new species. And yeah, it just highlighted the fact that Seychelles, I think, has so many species just waiting to be discovered. And these are just examples of 2 more species which we were able to photograph, and we're pretty sure they're new species too, but we just couldn't get samples of them to describe. But we hope going forward that we get the opportunity to get back underwater and get samples of these species, and hopefully find new species. But yeah, going forward, I just hope to sort of inspire everybody listening to spend time looking at the unbelievable fish diversity that is in Seychelles waters. I think just if in 3 weeks we could find so many new species records, range extensions, and new species on 2 small islands in the broader Seychelles, I think it really just highlights the fact that there's so much still to be discovered. And this fish biodiversity represents such a unique natural heritage for Seychelles. And yeah, I just encourage everybody to look more carefully at those species around you, to be inquisitive, to find out what species you are seeing. Feel free to email us and ask us if you don't know what species are. Hopefully our book will also help to guide people in the right direction going forward. And I really hope that this is the start of many more fish species discoveries in Seychelles. Yeah, Chris and I both really like to just thank so many people who helped us describe the species and identify the species. These are individuals from around the world that were experts in their field, taxonomists from all over, and just on all the people who helped photograph fish and dive, and the Seychelles Ministry for supporting the project, and Minister Cosgrove for writing the forward for our fish guide, as well as others in the Save Our Seas Arros Research Centre for providing support for the study. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Chris and Dr. Daly. We have a bit of questions coming in, but on my side, I would just like to thank you for this presentation, especially on the parts where you touched on the threatened species. I think it is critically important, and I agree that there's quite a bit of work to be done to improve the status of the species in our waters. And I agree with Chris on the statement he made, whereby he said that the data deficient species are likely to be threatened as well. So again, there's quite a bit of work to be done. So the ministry is committed to do some further work on threatened species. So your question is there any work that you can do to get the public's attention and remove shark from local restaurants' menus?
I can try to answer that. Thank you. Yeah, I think that for many shark species, there's a value in tourism, as well as the fact that a conservation value because of their important ecosystem role. And in contrast, you could be eating them. And I think certainly in the case of sharks, their value, both in terms of tourism, sustainable tourism, and also conservation and ecological sustainability, far outweighs the value as food, especially for sharks. So I think, yeah, in terms of bringing the public's attention to this, I think I guess people need to appreciate sharks more for their conservation and tourism value than their food value. But I'm not exactly sure how to go about doing that. I think it's a slow change. People's perceptions slowly change over time.
Thank you, Ryan. We have other questions coming in, so we will move on. The next one is, what is the process for putting together a field guide?
Chris, do you want to answer that one?
Sure, thanks, Ryan. Yeah, that's a huge question, April. I don't know really where to start with that one. I mean, it takes a long time for sure, and I think if you've got a few different collaborators working on the project, it certainly helps to spread the workload. But I think to identify, you know, your subject first, and also your target audience, and then go about collecting your data that you want to include within the guide, your images, your information. But it's constantly an ongoing process, because something that we found as we were doing it is that species were getting upgraded on the IUCN Red List in terms of their threatened status. There was also a lot of updates in terms of the taxonomy of different species as further genetic analysis was being done by researchers across the region. So it's kind of a living, breathing process that constantly changes as you're going along. But yeah, we were fortunate that we had a publisher that was behind the project and was willing to support us, and so that enabled us to just concentrate on putting together the actual guide and collecting the photographs and the information that we could then send to them for the production part of the book.
Thank you, Chris. And the next question, I'm sure everybody wants to know as well. So is, where can we buy the field guide? Where and when can we buy the guide?
Yeah, it should be available May 2021, so next year, and it will be available for purchase in Seychelles, as well as on Amazon and in bookstores in the UK and the US.
And then we have, I'm just checking if this is for this presentation. And no, it's not. So thank you very much, Chris and Ryan, for the wonderful presentation. And I would also like to thank all the presenters. Okay, we have another question, sorry. The last one, we're taking the last question. So what will be the naming process of the new species?
Yeah, good question. Naming a species is always an interesting one. Ultimately, the taxonomist, whoever describes the species, names it, and I think typically it's either named after the person who discovered it, or it's named after the area which it's from, or it could be named for a description about it. For example, if it had blue lines in Latin, you could call it Ceruleo lineatus. And that just depends on the taxonomists, but it's a really good question. And yeah, I think it's good to get creative about it if possible, but it really depends who the taxonomist is. And it's interesting that just describing a new species does really depend on a taxonomist with the expertise, because describing a species is really quite a complicated process that, you know, not all of us can do. So we do rely on the few taxonomists in the world that are experts in their field and can sort of guide their naming way of doing things, but ultimately it's their decision. So I hope that helps answer your question.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So with this, we have reached the end of today's presentations. And on behalf of all the organization organizers and hosts, I would like to thank everybody who attended, and also all the presenters. Thank you very much for listening and for participating in today's session. Thank you very much, and good evening, everybody.